Okay, this is the panel on mental health on the page and off. We've got some lovely panelists here. Would you like to all introduce yourselves?
Hi, I am JR, and I'm a romance writer who weaves a lot of anxiety and depression into my stories because those are things that I deal with in my real life.
I am Marisa Noelle. I am a young adult and middle grade author of sci-fi, dystopian, horror, fantasy. Mental health has always been a huge passion of mine. As what JR said, it's also been part of my life, and I've always felt that its representation in novels for our teenagers is very important. So you'll find some aspect of mental health in all of my books. And I also mentor aspiring young adult and middle grade authors for the Write Mentor program based out of the UK. So help authors strive to get to their potential.
Hi, I'm Jon Herrera. I write children's fantasy adventure. I'm an author of 2 books. I went undiagnosed with mental illness for most of my life and not even realizing that things could get better or that you could get help. So my interest is in letting others know that it's possible for things to get better.
My name is Tyler Wittkofsky. I am a multi-genre author, and I have bipolar anxiety and depression. It was something much like John that I was undiagnosed with for much of my life, but it's included in almost all of my writing, and I recently started a publishing company, and our goal is to kind of promote mental health and mental health awareness as well. So.
Hi, I'm Dianna Gunn. I write mostly fantasy with varying levels of horror and occasionally dabble in science fiction. And I also write a lot of nonfiction, mostly for my day job as a freelance writer. And in terms of my mental health, let's just say it's a mess. I have a whole lot of diagnoses. Most recently ADHD, which, I assume I had for my whole life, but because I'm a woman, they didn't notice till I was almost 30. Good job, guys.
Yeah. I'm going to have to apologize for the psychologist there. We're not very good at that. Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to start off with quite a, I suppose, a general question. In how would you all go about maintaining your mental health when you're writing for like extended periods? Going through, drafting can be exhausting all the time. How would you manage your mental health during that process?
For me personally, I have friends that I check in with pretty regularly that we all kind of have some of the similar struggles with our mental health, especially during the drafting process and during the writing process. So for us, it's been really nice to form a community and speak with each other and just check in and say, hey, how's things going? I know you're writing a really heavy topic. Do you need to talk? And it's been really nice to kind of have that sense of community because I am such an introvert and I'm one to kind of turn into myself when I'm feeling more depressed, and knowing that someone's going to be reaching out to me and that I can reach out to them has been really helpful for me in the writing process.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things. And I think the strategies I use aren't specifically related to writing, but the tools that I've learned for all of my life. So whenever there is times where life, whether it's writing or something else, does become overwhelming, what have I got in my toolbox that I can use? And obviously there are different things that work for different people and depending on what diagnosis you have. So I think it's really important to understand what makes you you and what makes you anxious, and then to try all these different things and to adopt the right methods for you. Specifically to writing, I find that having a support group of other writers who can help you through rejections or can motivate you when you're having a book launch, or for whatever reason you've got your tribe that you can rely on. And we came together as writers, but we're not just writers. We're not just a group of writers. We are a group of friends. And we can come into our private message group and we can talk about whatever's going on in our lives, and know that we've got each other's back. So it kind of snowballs into all of that. And I think that mental health conditions are quite common in the creative industry, not because you have to have a mental health condition to be able to express yourself, but it's a way that we deal with our mental health conditions. It's a way that it's our form of therapy. So you will often find writers or other creators that I think are quite similar to yourself and that will understand what you are experiencing as a writer.
That's a really good idea. I think I don't have that group of other writers for support, but I think it's something worth looking into for me. But I am fortunate though that and privileged that I do have support in the form of a psychiatrist, therapist, my family. They're all very supportive, and I'm fortunate that I can get those things. And like you were saying about the toolbox, it's you build up that toolbox slowly and learn skills to help you cope with the struggles that come with the writing. So eventually they become automatic, but at the time I rely mainly on my family and psychiatrist and therapist. I'm actually going through a kind of a transition in my medication, so it's a bit of a struggle at the moment, but I have people that support me.
That's good luck. I hope
you.
you adjust well.
Yeah, and just like y'all, I use my support group as well. But for me personally, I found that using my senses really helped me to focus and concentrate and get out of my own head. So I'm a big advocate for smells and using candles, wax warmers, essential oil diffusers, incense burners, anything like that to kind of create a smell that sparks a positive memory to help me kind of get out of my own head. Same thing with touch, grabbing that blanket or that sheet or that bear that I've had for my whole life and just being able to transport myself to a simpler time. Hearing, white noise and music, especially whenever I'm writing, I like to put together playlists for my characters and my writing and listen to that to kind of escape whatever may be going on that's tumultuous in my own head. And so that I'm able to focus on that writing and focus on the task at hand.
Tyler, I just wanted to pick up on what you said about the smells, because yeah, that really resonated with me, because I think I've got a diffuser in every room of my house, actually. Yes. And I have so many essential oils that I make combinations depending on my mood and what I want to feel. And I think smells are so powerful and they're precognitive. So they can have such an impact on your mental well-being. Absolutely. I think it's a really good thing. Yeah. High five.
I also use a lot of smells with mine, and I tend to pick like one specific candle scent that I use throughout one specific book. So when I'm drafting, when I'm editing, I keep going back to that same candle. And it's nice because it does kind of help me channel that escape into that book and get in the right mindset for those characters and that theme versus, a different set of characters or a different theme or a different concept.
That's a lovely thing to do. Do you find when you go back and light a candle of a similar smell, like months later, it brings you right back to that particular book and those characters then and makes that connection for you?
Yeah, it definitely evokes the same memory. And I think I've had to kind of retire a few candles in my rotation. Yeah. And then there's a lot of candles that I will only burn when I'm not writing, because I don't want to bring some of that same energy into my stories. So I hear you there, Tyler, that like scent is really powerful.
Yeah.
I gotta say the drafting is not where I run into mental health issues. For me, drafting is magic most of the time. And even when it gets tough, usually that just means I take a few days off because I've been working too hard and I need time away from the story. It's very rare for drafting itself to cause me mental health struggles. It's more likely for my mental health struggles around other things, mostly money, to interfere with my drafting. However, editing is hard. Editing is where, especially because I do have ADHD, editing gets really tedious, and also it can be really hard for me as someone with something called rejection sensitive dysphoria. Basically, it means that I have a tendency to take rejection of any kind as a personal attack. which is great when you're in publishing. And that is really tough when working with editors. It's one reason I'm really grateful to work with editors online mostly. Like over the years, I have gotten better at, you know, taking criticism of my work and being able to work with it. But it's still tough. And it's much, much better for me to be able to like read an email with feedback and then walk away for a day or three and vent out my emotions before I come back to it and actually try to use that feedback.
But that's really interesting. It's like the bits you've got control over, like the fun creative parts, like that doesn't affect your mental health. And like, yeah, that's interesting. That's cool.
Well, I will say there is one exception. There have been a couple of really hard scenes that I've written where I've been like, wow, that was so intense. I need to like go like have a cry or take a nap.
Yeah, I feel like that might be like a slightly more common one as well, where people, you know, get so invested. Because when you're writing something that's like 3,000, 5,000 words and is really dark and depressing, or it can really take a toll.
Oh yeah, I mean, actually, that's kind of my goal with my current work in progress, which is a short story. My goal is to make myself cry with this one. I feel like if you make yourself cry with your own writing, that means you are doing something right, actually.
Yeah, like if you manage to upset yourself, who is often approaching it from like an almost analytical sense of, and you're approaching it bit by bit, then yeah, it's gonna have an impact on the reader as well.
Yeah, and like as the writer, often you know these things in advance, even if not very far in advance, you know before it happens, so you're able to brace yourself in a way that readers aren't necessarily.
Yeah, like you can't get caught off guard by a plot twist, and yet sometimes you still are, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that question was largely about, I guess, the more meta aspects of mental health with writing. But I think for the next one, I'm going to move into the text itself. And I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to ask, how much of your own experiences do you incorporate into your writing?
I can jump in. I put in a lot. I think it's hard to write about mental health when you haven't experienced it. Not that you can't, and you can do the research and you can absolutely get sensitivity readers, but people's experience of it is so individual and it's so different, and it's not one shoe fits all. And you know, I think I started writing because it was therapy for me. It was a way for me to get out these emotions that I didn't know how to deal with. And so in a sense, no matter what I was writing, it was taking my soul and my pain and all that along with it. And then I, you know, began to build my brand subconsciously. And I realized that every single one of my books had a character who was struggling with mental health. And what was really important to me was that the book isn't about trying to get over something, but the person who's going to save the world also happens to get panic attacks, or is also schizophrenic, and that creates some unique obstacles, but it's more about acceptance and identity rather than trying to get rid of something, which is what I tried to do for years. So especially as I write for young adult, I want the messages to be, you may have this thing that you don't like about you or that you're struggling with, but that actually doesn't mean you need to get rid of it. You need to find a way to deal with it. And you also need to appreciate the strengths that it can bring along with it. Because I think all of these diagnoses bring other things like increased levels of empathy and things like that. So I try to make sure that my characters, even though they might be having a panic attack when they're supposed to be jump kicking the big baddie's ass, you know, they also are able to accept that and find other solutions in how to solve their problems. That's always, but now I'm rambling, so someone else.
Yeah, so my first book that I wrote, or that I published, I should say, was kind of loosely based on my experiences with mental health. There was a lot of what took place in my life prior to my diagnosis and after my diagnosis that was incorporated into that book, because I wanted people to see that it's real and it does matter, and people go through this, but you're not alone going through it. And that's, I really highlighted how my family and my support system were there for me. My next book was a romance novel, and the main character has bipolar just like I do. He, you know, I use a lot of my experiences through the things that he's going with his, between the rage and the depression and the highs and the lows, and, you know, making sure that it's transpired in there, but you also have that hope, that feeling that, you know what, I can be loved. I am capable of being loved, and I am capable of loving. So that's always been the point to me, is to show that there is hope, that, yeah, you know, we struggle, and it is a struggle, but there is hope at the end of the tunnel. We just got to see that light and try to make our way to it.
Absolutely.
See, as a romance writer, I think that's so important, because a lot of my struggle with mental health has led me to go, I don't know that I, you know, will ever find love, or things like that. And so channeling that through my characters and saying that these characters who have anxiety, who have depression, who have the same things that I do, are worthy of love. And I view them as being worthy of that love. Then by contrast, I should be viewing myself as someone who's also worthy of the same kind of love that I expected them to be able to have, and them to be able to experience and embrace. And so for me, it's funny when I have a beta reader going, can you write a character that isn't dealing with mental health? And I think for me, that's not necessarily the point, because these are characters who have whole life experiences, and who maybe make decisions based out of their trauma, or make decisions based out of mental health. Or who that's just a part of their life, and they are every bit of worthy of that happy ending as someone who doesn't have a mental illness that they're dealing with. But that's reflected a lot in my own life, that my self-talk has gotten better by the result of me telling my characters, it's okay, you deserve good things in your life.
I started off writing short stories, and they were a lot more, I guess, overt and with the mental health issues. But when moving on to children's literature, I do think that, of course, they should be exposed to that sort of thing. But personally, I don't feel ready to be one to communicate that message. Just because of myself, I don't feel like I know enough about it. I will need to be more. I'm working up to it though. So my characters have some of my personal experiences in them, but in a kind of more less overt manner. Like Emma gets sad when it rains, things like that. The closest one is a character who it's due to more of a kind of fantasy magical thing that he it's a lot of self-deprecation issues and anxiety, depression, but it's more in a fantastic kind of realm. And that's about as far as I've gotten with the children's literature. But it, you know, in future books there will be more about it.
So the next question I'd like to ask, I suppose, links into that, in that how would you go about researching mental health problems and conditions that you want to write that you don't personally experience?
That's very far away from me. I'm still getting to know the ones that I do experience, like I said. So I would like to learn a lot more about these before I even think of branching out into writing about any others that I'm not familiar with.
I had always had an interest in mental health even before I had my own issues, and I did a psychology degree, and I've just always been fascinated by the human mind and the different scenarios, and so I started there with this degree, but I have studied journal articles and textbooks and things like that. And if there's a condition I don't know about so much, there are Facebook groups out there that you can join, and you can ask questions, and people are willing to answer those things. You can talk to people. I have met people with certain conditions that I have included, and I have been able to talk to them. You know, you find documentaries. Really, you just find as much as you can. to make sure that you've got an understanding of the totality of that disorder, but also that the way that you write it might be different to the way another person experiences that, and you just do the best that you can do. And I think as long as you're sensitive, then and your heart's in the right place, then I think that is the key to showing sensitive representation, I guess.
For me, like, even when I'm writing something that I do share that experience, it's always important to me to try to get a paid sensitivity reader who also shares that, because even the things that I experience, I know I don't experience them the same way that someone else might experience that. So to get other perspectives, especially from someone who shares that same condition or shares that same kind of mental journey, can be really helpful to making sure that I'm giving it a well-rounded look. And I know that doesn't necessarily mean like someone else has this experience, so I'm going to change everything about it to fit their experience, but it's more like weaving elements from their experience and making sure that the things of my experience are recognizable enough to others that they can see themselves in that experience too.
For me, one of the greatest resources is the Mighty. It's a website, blog, magazine type of thing. And it's got stories and stories and stories and posts from people who are actually dealing with pretty much any mental illness or disability that you can think of. I mean, they go as far as to, things like amputees and chronic migraine sufferers. So that to me is one of the most valuable resources, because those are real life experiences that you get, and you can see more than just one example. You can see, there's hundreds and hundreds for each one of blog posts that people have written and have expressed who they are and how they feel and how they react to certain things. So it's just a great resource to be able to get a new perspective from other people.
Wow. I am part of something called the Spoonie Authors Network, which is a blog collective where disabled writers share their stories and their creative techniques. And there are a lot of posts about mental illness on there. I also edit the Spoonie Authors podcast for the Spoonie Authors Network and host it. I do the podcast, yeah. And I've interviewed quite a lot of authors with mental illness on there. And really, I mean, there are so many places where people are publishing their stories. Just go out and look for those stories and listen to disabled people telling their own stories. You can get some helpful information from medical journals, but really a lot of the science around mental health is so heavily biased, and a lot of it is outdated, and a lot of the stuff that we have access to especially is outdated, because a lot of the work that is going on right now in the field contradicts a lot of the things that we thought we knew before. So listen to the people who actually have the mental illnesses about their lived experiences first and foremost.
I mean, that makes sense, I guess, because you're very rarely going to be approaching mental health from a diagnostic point of view anyway, if you're writing. So it would be very weird to, just read the DSM-5 and approach it that way. That wouldn't feel human.
Absolutely. I mean, even if the DSM-5 wasn't controversial in a lot of ways, that would still be a weird way to approach your character.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, because when you're writing about anything, you don't find the manual online. If you're writing about, I don't know, a car, it's important to the story for whatever reason, you don't then, find all the information about it online. Yeah.
And I do also want to second the recommendation for the Mighty. That is actually a great resource that I really enjoy too.
Okay. And the other thing that a lot of people brought up on the other panel is not beta readers. Oh, I've forgotten the word now. That's embarrassing.
I spent 3 minutes dancing around a word in a podcast I was doing and a couple couple hours ago, so no judgment here.
Sensitivity
reader.
Yeah. Oh, weird how that happened at the same time. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, they all said that like sensitivity readers are really important in like representing things that you don't experience. Do you have any, I guess, additional thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I haven't really written a character whose mental illnesses are different from my own yet. I've got a few to choose from, so there's, lots to go on there. But I have a very significant character in my next book, Moonshadow's Champion, who is blind. And so I did work with a couple of sensitivity readers on that, and I learned a lot from them. Sensitivity reading it's really important work. And I know it sounds daunting, especially because if you're going the self-publishing route, you've probably already committed to spending like $1,000 or $2,000 on editing. But I think it's really important to get sensitivity readers separately and to pay them as much as you can afford to pay them, because it's hard work. And it's not just hard work in the sense that editing is hard work. It's hard work in the sense that often these people are re-traumatizing themselves to some extent in order to interact with your story. And the work they're doing is specifically revisiting trauma and bad things that they've experienced, so they can tell you either, yes, you're writing about this correctly, or no, you're writing about this incorrectly, or, I don't think you should write about this at all. And that is
That is a cat.
That is Hobbs.
Hello. Didn't quite see that coming, I'll be honest.
Hi. What would you like? Can you not try to eat my planner? Excuse me. Yeah, so that's a great mood ruiner. I wasn't trying to do anything serious or anything. Yes, sensitivity reading is hard work, and I think a lot of people think of it as just another kind of beta reading, but it really isn't. It is something far beyond that. And a lot of the sensitivity readers I know are also professional editors and will do some other story edits kind of just by instinct while they're working on your books. So you actually do often get two for the price of one.
Yeah, it'll be like, oh, so you've got this thing wrong, and this is maybe a bit, I'd be careful about that. But also, while I'm here, you spelled this wrong. Hell yeah.
Exactly.
Are there any mental health conditions that you'd like to see represented more often or differently in writing, and I guess in media in general?
I'd love to see the bipolar hero instead of the bipolar villain. I think that's a stereotype that has been perpetuated by not only, arts, but also through modern media. And it's one that I would like to see changed, because there are a lot of people who have bipolar disorder who are genuinely good people and who deserve love and who are not quote unquote crazy. I mean, that's just bizarre to me that those two words are so associated still. But yeah, so just the bipolar hero is what I want to see more of.
I want to see everything. I don't think we've even scratched the surface, to be honest. And I think especially with adult fiction, there's lots of books that tackle the problem. The 14-year-old who has anorexia, or the person developing bipolar. But as you say about the bipolar hero, I want to see these characters who are, in the Hunger Games, for instance, but they happen to have one of these other conditions. I mean, what if every member of the Hunger Games had a different mental health condition? What would that look like? I think that would be awesome. And it would inform their decision making. So I want to see a lot more of that kind of stuff. And one of the conditions I think is demonized often is the dissociative identity disorder. And spoiler, that is the topic of my book, Unraveling Luna. But I tried to handle it in a lot more sensitive way, that she's not she's not demonizing these, you know, these characters. She is having her own struggle and how she copes with what happens in the book. And I think, you know, when you've got movies like Split and things like that, you know, we need to see the positive side of this and how creative some of these individuals can be, and absolutely amazing. But I think there's so much to explore. I just think all of these conditions need to be normalized, and to be in so many movies and books. Yeah.
I think for me, it's not even necessarily about a specific condition, but I would love to see more positive representation of therapy in fiction, in you know, media overall. I know that, you know, you see a lot of, oh, well, here's this therapist and, you know, they're charging me a whole bunch of money and I don't even know if it's helping and things like that. But you don't see a lot of people going to therapy and the way that therapy helps them.
Yeah.
Or the skills that they might build through that therapy to inform more of their life and more of the decisions that they make in the future. Not that therapy is necessarily a cure-all, but I feel like we don't have a lot of people who show the fact that they take medication for certain things, show the fact that they're seeing a therapist. You know, we might see that mental health struggle, but we don't necessarily see the things that they're doing with that mental health on a basic level to care for themselves.
I totally agree with that. And I think if I can just pick up on a couple of your points about the therapist, you know, I think the therapist is portrayed as A, a crutch, or B, somebody that cures you of your problems. You know, and when I was 19 and I walked into my first therapist's office, and I was fully you know, if I just turned up, she would wave her magic wand and it would all go away. And it took me years to understand that I had work to do, and that there is no magic wand, and that, you know, you have to, you become a new person, and that you need to adjust to that, so that this walking into a therapist's office isn't some cure-all, you know. And it's interesting what you say about medication, because, you know, every couple of years my doctor will say to me, well, do you think it's time to come off your SSRIs? I'm like, why do I need to do that? They keep me ticking over. I'm perfectly happy. Why would I do that? Why would I screw with that situation, you know? So absolutely.
Totally agree with everything. Just I think there's not enough portrayal of everything, like has been said, and just more genuine. A more genuine portrayal is, because when it's there, often it's just to serve the story without. So they take liberties with the illnesses or portray them in a different way. And yeah, and therapy and medication. I cringed when the Matrix movie dumps his pills in the sink and then he starts to see reality as it is. I was like, oh no, why are you doing this? Yeah.
See, I mean, there are still, even I haven't seen it yet. Brand new movies still causing problematic representation. You know, it's still going on. So yeah, and I actually kind of thought when we went to see Marvel's Endgame and we had Fat Thor, who was dependent on alcohol, and he was fat because he had mental health problems. I was thinking, what message are you trying to send here? I mean, okay, it was funny, and I get what they were trying to do, but what are we telling people with mental health conditions, or people that use food as comfort? You know, what are we actually saying about that? Mm-hmm. So it would be nice to see these big blockbusters actually choosing to make better decisions.
I actually have what I feel like is a potentially counterintuitive answer to this, and it's not that I necessarily want to see more characters with ADHD. It's that I want to see more characters actually say they have ADHD, because I can rattle off a lot of different characters that I feel like I can confidently say that this character is someone with ADHD based on the way that they're written, their characteristics, the way that they live their life, but it's never stated. And while I am not autistic myself, I do have some very close autistic relatives, and I've you know, the more that I have learned about autism from them, the more I've started to see something similar with autism, is that I see a lot of characters in mainstream fiction that are very much coded autistic, act like they have ADHD or like they are autistic, but it's never acknowledged. It's never openly said. Even if in the writer's mind the character knows that, it doesn't actually come up in conversation in the story. And I kind of understand with fantasy, this is kind of tough because there's a hesitance to use terms that are too modern when you're writing fantasy, especially when you're writing fantasy that is very clearly rooted in a historical era or based on a historical period. But I think there are still ways to make it clear that the character knows that they have a brain difference, that they are neurodivergent without actually necessarily using the word. You know, like I just finished reading Fire Becomes Her, which has, you know, characters who are asexual and aromantic, and they don't use those words. But what they do say is, I'm only interested in having friends. I don't want a romantic relationship ever. Like, that's weird to me. And that makes it clear that they are that thing and they know they are that thing. Whereas a lot of ADHD and autistic coded characters, it's clear to us, but it doesn't seem like they know.
That's interesting. I guess like we have words with these things, but that doesn't mean you can't explain them without the words, you know?
Yeah. And if you're writing science fiction, there's or contemporary fiction, there's absolutely no reason to not just use the words. Please have them acknowledged. I would like to stop having these characters be headcanon neurodivergent. I would like them to be canon neurodivergent.
I'm only going to bring this up just because I actually watched a thing where I saw this trope like last night. I get so annoyed by the, oh, look, a butterfly representation of an ADHD person. Because it's like a very specific version of it, you know?
Yeah. For me, it depends on the context. I feel like that kind of representation annoys me a lot in Western media, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of my favorite anime characters are exactly that portrayal of ADHD. And I don't know what the difference is there, honestly. Maybe it's just like I have a different set of expectations for anime. I mean, I definitely have a different set of expectations for anime, like more blood, less parents. But yeah, for some reason, I love those characters in Japanese media, in anime, and I hate them in Western media. Maybe it's the amount of respect they get from other characters.
It might also be that I think personality traits in anime are already like heightened.
Yeah.
And
like
so
everyone is so extra.
Yeah, for that trait to exist, it feels natural and believable in that world. But then if you have, you know, a grounded and gritty, I don't know, detective TV show, and you have a character who just, you know, wanders off, forgets what they're doing, sees a shiny thing on the floor, it's very different.
I think almost every single of a character in therapy that I can think of is toxic. The therapist is either just like flat out incompetent, or is competent but also very bad with like actual professionalism and boundaries. And I mean, sometimes that works for the story, and I understand, you know, Western storytelling is built on conflict in every scene, in every situation, but you don't need to have a bad therapist to create conflict in a therapy scene. There's already so much conflict happening in a lot of therapy. It's hard work. You're dealing with a lot of stuff. And while the conflict may be mostly internal, you can find ways to externalize that. Good directors and cinematographers have always found ways to externalize things. And in writing, you can internalize it. If you're writing a novel, you can just straight up have the conflict be in the character's thoughts. There's so much potential to have it actually, the conflict be, we're working through the character's internal conflict. I also do want to give a shout out to the show Lucifer, because while Linda Martin does not do great with the boundaries thing necessarily, she's actually a really great therapist in a lot of ways. And the way that she leads Lucifer to various realizations about himself, like, that's what a therapist is actually supposed to do. And that's not what a lot of TV therapists do.
I do feel like in most other shows, if they'd had a therapist deal with that particular individual, they either would have, like, you know, raged or, you know, had a fight or something. But yeah, it's a very, I guess, patient character, a very caring, and, you know, with the client's needs. It's, yeah, I was quite impressed by that one as well.
Yeah, I recently rewatched the first couple seasons, and it is just so impressive how patient she is with him, but also like how much the sessions with her actually kind of feel like what it feels like to be in therapy. I don't think I've ever felt that way so strongly about therapy in a TV show. Of course, I watch a lot of fantasy where they just have never heard of therapy, so.
I mean, there's almost like a trope. I don't think trope's the right word, but like common analytical, I guess, response to media where it's just like, damn, all these characters should go to therapy, you know? And
I mean, a lot of stories would not, a lot of, if characters had just gone to therapy, or if therapy existed in the worlds that they lived in. Because I mean, a lot of the time when they don't go to therapy, it's because it literally doesn't exist.
yeah,
There's no concept of that. I mean, even in my own fantasy world in Moonshadow, there's no concept of therapy.
I do think weirdly sometimes fantasy can almost just get around that through just like normal interactions being therapeutic, and it's not like intentional in the same way therapy is, but it has some of the same results sometimes. That can be quite satisfying to read, I think.
Absolutely.
I think we're going to move back to the more writing side and the more meta side here. And I'm going to ask you if you think the publishing industry is accepting and supportive of people with mental health problems. And that's both for the writers that are getting published and the employees in these businesses.
No.
I don't think so. And that's part of the reason that I got into the publishing business, was because I wanted to be able to have those stories, because I've seen so many people who who are so open about their mental illness online, and they just seem to have so much trouble getting anybody to accept them. And from my point of view, I've gone through struggles where people won't come out and straight say, I'm not accepting you because of X, Y, and Z, but they simply deny. And to me, there needs to be more transparency in those decisions too. And being able to give people that peace of mind helps to contribute to their mental health by not just leaving them hanging in the drying. You know, this goes for authors who aren't accepted. You know, they need to be told, you know, this is what we saw, this is what we liked, this is what we didn't like, and this is how it can be better. Because that's the only way any of us can continue to improve as writers, but also as human beings, and continue to have a safe mental health and a safe space to go to whenever you want to. Because if you start writing and you're getting turned down publication after publication after publication because they don't want to accept your writing, because there is too much mental illness. And I have been turned down because of mental illness in my writing. They told me that was not a subject that they wanted to broach. So I've seen firsthand that there are times where mental health is shunned, and it's time for that to change completely, because it's more common than we think.
Yeah, I think publishing is still very archaic. The whole attitude. It's like an old boys white boy network, and trying to think outside the box and be inclusive. I think they have a checklist of like, right, well, we're going to have an author with mental health, we're going to have a Black author, we're going to have a Hispanic author, we're going to tick all our check boxes. But if you have another author come along and say, well, I've got great this story, no, we've done our checklist. So they say they're doing these things, but are they actually interested in progressing that? I'm not so sure. So we definitely need more genuineness in that entire industry. It needs to be. And I think, with self-publishing and indie publishing, where you are free to publish things at a much broader breadth and give readers exactly what they're looking for, there's no gatekeepers involved. They are up against that, and there is competition, and it's growing. And when you think about the power of book talk and how these authors are reaching thousands and thousands of readers who are turning to indie authors because they are approaching the subjects that the mainstream publishing is not. So it's something they definitely need to take stock of and do better at.
I think there are some agents who are trying to do better, especially with the querying process and making it more accessible for neurodivergent people, people with mental health struggles. And so I feel like there are some really good actors out there who are trying, but as a whole, the industry is lagging behind. And I do think that's been something that's been really positive for me in finding the indie press that I'm with is, the owner and the editors and everything are all very open about their mental health situations and very open about, hey, this is the timeline that we're looking at, but this may vary based on our mental health, your mental health, things can change and shift. And so it's been easier for me to go to them and say, hey, I might need this deadline adjusted because this is what I'm up against right now. And so knowing that there are small presses out there who can do it, it really starts to kind of put into perspective the fact that so many larger presses aren't willing to do that. And that could, I think, shape where we get our mental health representation in the future. And that a lot of it might come from self-publishing, indie publishing, until the broader industry catches on.
And it's not just authors either. I think, as you mentioned, agents. I mean, I look at my agent, for instance, and these agents read submissions outside of their normal working hours. Editors read submissions outside of their normal working hours. Editors left in droves throughout COVID because they just, the stress that's put on them and the hours they're supposed to put in outside of their normal working hours. So the whole industry needs some kind of shake-up to look after all the stages and all the different types of workers that are involved in that, so that we can all be healthy together,
The publishing industry is not just not accommodating to mental illness. The publishing industry creates mental illness. The publishing industry has created industry-wide burnout. The process of submitting and waiting and waiting and waiting and dealing with rejection. I mean, even if you start from a place of self-confidence, that takes its toll, by the time you have like 20 rejections, which is not uncommon, you start to wonder, like, do I really have the chops? And if writing is something you're deep passionate about, that's part of your identity, like I feel like it is for at least most of the writers I know, then losing confidence about your writing often means losing confidence in yourself. And that leads to depression, anxiety, all kinds of things. And that's without even getting into, once you do get into it, how little everyone in the industry is paid and how ridiculous the work schedules are for everyone. And, a lot of the industry is still centralized in New York City and certainly aren't paying people well enough to live decent lives there. The whole industry is a chaotic mess. And I don't see how it's going to fix itself. Honestly, I feel like traditional publishing is kind of cannibalizing itself. And I don't know how much of it's going to be left in 20 years.
This isn't a question I had planned, but I just think it you might have some interesting thoughts on it. And that's if you think the self-publishing boom, like how that affected, I guess, people's approach to writing in terms of mental health?
Well, in my case, I would have never. I have anxiety, and it's been paralyzing a lot of times. And to just the rejection that comes with trying to get something published traditionally is something I wouldn't have been able to handle, I don't think, at the time. So self-publishing gave me an alternate way to get my work out there without having to go through the process of the dozens of rejections that you get and all that's involved in that.
Sometimes it's not even the rejection. Sometimes it's just the waiting. You know, I've had responses like 2 years later when I'm like either a full request or a rejection or whatever it is. And you just kind of think, this is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Which is what I know, the emerging hybrid author, which is what I call myself, because I do have an agent, but I have indie books out there. So I have been able to publish things and satisfy the needs that I have to get things out there while I also pursue a traditional route. And that really appeals to me because I need to feel like I'm achieving something, and I'm not achieving something unless I'm publishing something, but I'm also pursuing both things. And I feel like both of those options are viable and open to me. And I think it's one of the wonderful things about how things are changing and that the hybrid author is an emerging thing and becoming more accepted. So that definitely helps with the anxiety.
And another thing is what was mentioned earlier, that you have a lot more topics that you can deal with, and if you publish independently, I think it was Marisa that said it, that you can just deal with, publish whatever you want, really. Yeah. So things that publishers might not touch.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I've noticed since being on TikTok is the adult romance reverse harem genre has exploded on TikTok, and that's not something a mainstream publisher are ever going to publish. So at least not in the next 20 years, you know. So it's wonderful to see, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it definitely strips a lot of the barriers that might exist for getting published, in that if you are too anxious to query, too anxious to wait, or you have those times where it's like, I can be very productive and write a lot of things right now, but I may have to take a year off to focus on my mental health. And so I've got these things that can sustain me. A traditional publishing schedule doesn't always work with that. And so it does strip a lot of those barriers down and say, I'm going to be able to work when I'm able to work, take breaks when I have to take breaks, and make sure that I'm not having to work that into another person's schedule necessarily, and can focus on what my needs are as an author and as someone who is trying to get my work out in the world. That barrier there is really removed, and it's very helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think it's that control, isn't it? And I know I definitely struggle with not being in control of a situation. I think a lot of people with mental health issues do, you know, because you don't know what's happening to you. You don't, at whatever point you landed with your issue, and suddenly you are out of control. So having that element of control definitely brings some stability and peace to your mind, I think.
So I do also self-publishing, and I also want to talk about small press publishing a little bit, because I do feel like a lot of small presses, well, yes, burnout is still a very real thing in a lot of small presses. I do feel like they are actively working harder to make accommodations and to be forgiving and to be supportive, if not financially, then, you know, being part of a small publisher tends to feel like being part of a community in a way that, from my understanding, I've only been small press published, that it doesn't when you're published with a bigger publisher. Like, you're not, even within your own genre, connected to other authors with your publisher in the same way. So you don't have the same level of community and support. And that makes a big difference when you're already struggling with our ridiculous work schedules and terrible pay. As for self-publishing, I think that there are a lot of benefits to it. But it's also, I don't think it is the solution for everything and for everyone. And the trouble is that self-publishing can be really great, and it can give you the space you need to create your own timelines and to not feel bad if you miss a deadline, because the only person you're screwing is yourself, and to work on the stories you want to work on and when you want to work on them. But at the same time, self-publishing requires so many other jobs. You either have to have money to do them, or money to hire people to do them, or you have to have the attention span, the energy, the stability to, and of course, you know, the ability to learn all of these things like formatting and marketing and graphic design, because you need to at least be able to put together basic social media graphics. There's so much that goes into self-publishing that you can have other people do when you have traditional publishing, and those things are not possible for a lot of mentally ill and other marginalized people to access.
That's interesting. I'm just thinking about that for a moment.
Like, self-publishing is great, but we need to have some level of traditional publishing in the world, in my opinion, because self-publishing is simply not going to work for everyone.
Do you think that like just the existence and the threat of like self-publishing and small presses could put pressure on the rest of the publishing industry to improve? Or do you think they're somewhat a lost cause?
No, the big four, the big four don't care that we exist. The big four are dinosaurs. They will, if we are the comet that destroys traditional publishing, I am telling you right now, they are just going to stand and watch and go, what's that pretty flaming rock? The publishing is so slow to change, and the people who are actually at the top are so obviously out of touch with the reality of their industry on the ground that I don't think they will notice that the small presses have overtaken them until it's already happened, if it ever does. They also have like billions of dollars, which kind of insulates you from needing to understand reality, but like, we'll see how long that lasts.
I think I'm going to jump back into the textual with what I think is a fun question. How would you approach the mental health of a character who lives their life in ways that just are so far outside of the norm of, I guess, real life? And so I've got a few prompts. So things like having magical powers, immortality, I guess being in like positions of great authority, you know, like a king, queen, whatever. How would you write their mental health?
So I used to write for a online blog called the Dark and Veil Universe. And it basically was a group of writers who scribed different characters throughout history, mythology, and I scribed the Minotaur from Greek mythology. So I incorporated, because his mother had died, I incorporated some depression and anxiety and things like that into his character to bring it to a little more of a different side of that immortality, because he's been living his entire life and he's been dealing with depression his entire life because he lost his mom and hasn't seen her in thousands of years. So just being able to get in there and try to think of, you know, they've been like this a lot longer than I have. So, you know, this character was 2,000 years old. They've discovered coping mechanisms. They've had to figure out ways to cope with it. For his, it was violence. And that was something that was kind of his journey. He started off as a violent monster and then evolved into a kind being who wound up getting married and having children. And I mean, so it was a happy ending altogether for him. So it was just trying to figure out what makes sense in that particular character situation, to what would their reaction to depression be, or what would their reaction to anxiety and anxious situation be, because they have experienced it so many times before.
Yeah. I love everything you just said. A Minotaur retelling, I just think that is fantastic. And I love the Minotaur. It's always been one of my favorite stories.
Me
So
too.
I want to go and find that. Is it available to read still? Because I would love to read that.
It's not, the blog shut down,
Okay.
but I am working on
Yeah.
a Kindle Vella series that will star him. So keep an eye
I
out.
would love to read that. I would. I think that out of the books that I've written, I think the one that I really think about is my dystopian trilogy. So it's set in an alternate future where genetic modification has become normal. So you can swallow a pill and you can grow wings, or you can increase your intelligence, or you can have permanently white teeth, or whatever you think you can have. And the main character is an unadjusted, so she has not adjusted her DNA at all. And her parents are the creators of these pills. But her mother's in prison for treason for refusing to make them. So she has had anxiety and panic attacks since her mother was taken away, and she then discovers that she has this dormant ability. And the way that she deals with that is basically, well, she doesn't, is that whatever ability she is using goes completely wrong. So she gets herself into these situations where she thinks, well, I can use my wings and I can fly away. But no, she crash lands because the anxiety has taken control. So we follow her arc, through the book. Through book one is showing that, she's got to accept this new image of herself. She's got to deal with her anxiety and how things can misfire when she's trying to use one of these abilities to save the world. But also throughout the trilogy, she develops all of these abilities, and then suddenly she gets this thirst for power and I want more and I want more, and how you deal with that trip to the dark side and coming back from that and what that does to your mental health. So I just explore, whether you have superpowers or something else, how anxiety can affect that, absolutely.
I guess the one that I've written is the Prince of Shadows. He's tremendously powerful. He can control shadows.
That's cool.
He's been stuck in a wasteland for 30 years and is basically depressed because of it. In his case, though, there is I guess one of the strategies he uses is setting small goals because he has a definite goal in mind, and there are several steps toward it. And his whole time there has been just working on those goals. So kind of the way we take a big task and split it into small pieces in order to make it more manageable.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just they would deal with it the same way, but in a grander scale, I suppose.
Is he your hero or is he your villain in this story?
He is kind of it's not
anti-hero.
known. It's not known in the beginning whether he's
Okay.
a good guy or a bad guy.
I'll have to read it. Yeah.
It's secret, yeah.
I think one thing that's interesting to me as a reader, because I mostly write contemporary, but from a readership perspective, it's been interesting to watch mental illness in fantasy and science fiction and things like that. We went from most books where it was, these elements make it a magic cure-all for your mental health issues. So you can do this and your mental health goes away and suddenly you are completely abled. To now we've got a lot more books that are entering the conversation that is balancing, this person has a mental illness or this person has a disability of some sort. And they use that in a way that works within the narrative without this magic cure that we've seen in so many books in the past, where it's like, oh, they couldn't do these great things if they're mentally ill, so we have to find a way to take their mental illness away. Whereas now we kind of are starting to see more books that come out where it's, this person is mentally ill and can do this really great thing, and not necessarily even in spite of their mental illness, but kind of as two separate parts of them, that they are mentally ill, they're also achieving this great thing. And so I think that shift in the conversation and that shift in publishing has been really affirming as someone who's mentally ill, to go, I can still do this really badass thing or this really awesome thing without this magic fix being applied.
Yeah. and that's what I've always wanted to show too. I just think people need to know that they can save the world even if they have a condition. And and one of the things I forgot to mention in this book 3, my main character, she goes and she takes anxiety out of her DNA, but then she still has anxiety. And so that's a pinnacle moment for her to realize it's not something you just delete or get over. It's something that you have to adjust to. So yeah, I love what you said, JR, absolutely.
Well, I would say about half of the cast of Moonshadow's Guardian is immortal. And most of those are actually royalty of some form or another. So, I mean, I feel like the specifics of the situation change, but the reality of mental illness doesn't if they have the same physicality that we do. And that's what I focus on a lot, is the physicality, especially because the thing I've written most at this point in my career is characters with PTSD. And so, I mean, the things they're flashing back to are very different from my own experience of flashbacks. I have never, been in a demon realm and been like physically tortured for like several decades in a row. But the sensation of having a flashback is pretty similar. It's still, that same sense of fear and dread and why is this happening again? The sense of waking up from a nightmare is still going to be shaky and freaked out and not quite sure where you are and disoriented. The sense of hypervigilance is still going to be my heart is racing and my palms are sweaty. Like those are very much things that I focus on and I lean into, and that I like to think I'm really good at writing, is the physicality of dealing with PTSD or anxiety or depression.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah, with like having PTSD for things that are like wildly beyond the scope of like normal life. And that's kind of interesting because, yeah, trauma like that doesn't scale to what the event is. You're either struggling with it or you're not. And
Yeah, exactly. A flashback about something mundane can be just as bad as a flashback about a horrific magical incident that killed hundreds of people. Your body doesn't actually know the difference.
So I've got one last question for you all, and it's one that I hope is going to collate all the ideas we've discussed today. And that is, what advice would you give to newer writers who are just coming into the industry, and how they can help handle their mental health?
The first thing I would say is that your mental health is more important than writing. If you have the benefit of making your own schedule when it comes to writing, if you're a self-published author, or don't beat yourself up if you can't maintain a routine, if you can't be like other writers are supposed to be. There are bad days, there are good days, but don't beat yourself up. And like I said, your mental health is more important. And the other thing is to do whatever you can to find support and help. I know that not everyone is as privileged as I've been, as fortunate as I am. But there are programs out there that you can look into if you don't have help already. But that's the main thing. Take care of your mind first, and find people to help you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I echo all of that. And I would say that it's not a race, that to take things in your own time. Don't compare your journey to other people, because everyone has a different way of doing things and people arrive at different places at different times. It's hard when you see social media full of happy announcements, but you're on your own path. and the only thing that can stand in your way is you. So it's really important that you understand your own limitations and work that into how you write and how you approach writing. The support network is really important, whether that is family or other writing friends or whoever that is, whether it's medication, whatever you're doing, is important to know and recognize when you're nosediving or relapsing or whatever that is, and take a step back. It's okay to take breaks. As I said, it's not a race. It's okay to take a break, take a step back, take some time, do something else for a while. I think those are the things off the top of my head that I would say. And I'm always around for hugs on social media if you need one of those as well. So,
Well, and speaking of social media, there feels like almost this pressure that you have to be everywhere in order to be successful. You have to have, you know, enough tweets in a given day, enough Instagram posts in a given week, be on TikTok, be here, be there. And sometimes that can get very draining. So it's okay to leave a social media site permanently, temporarily, whatever you need in order to keep the process going. You can still be successful without that. And then it's okay to mute people or block people or unfollow people when it's something that's causing an issue in your mental health. I know not all sites are great about filtering out content that you've blocked, but for me, knowing it's okay to do that, it's okay to go ahead and mute that person or even kind of burn that bridge if I have to keep my mental health there and to be able to use social media and promote myself while still managing my mental health. It's okay to do that.
For sure. I used to be, the first few blogs I did were kind of hesitant, like I feel bad. Now I'm just like, block.
I think for me, the biggest piece is don't be afraid to ask for help. We all need help. I've needed help. I still need help to this day on things. Find your support system, your friends, your family, your therapist, other writers, just anybody who you can lean on them, because it's a long journey. It's a tiring journey. Don't be afraid to take breaks. And if you need to lean on somebody and say, hey, will you look over this and let me know what you think? You know, I know it's a scary thing, but sometimes it's a really good confidence booster too. Whenever they get it back to you and they're like, wow, I want more. When can I read the rest? And you're like, I don't have the rest yet, but I'll get to it now that I know somebody wants to read it. So just don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to ask for feedback, because even bad feedback can be turned into good work.
absolutely.
Definitely.
Hear, hear.
Okay. There are a lot of interesting things brought up there. I'm going to give you all an opportunity to talk about, I guess, upcoming projects, things you've got going on, stuff that you'd like to promote briefly before we finish. I think we're going to start the other direction this time. Tyler, would you like to?
Sure. So I guess my biggest project is Tea with Coffee Media, which is my independent publishing house. We do everything we can to help tell the untold stories. We want to help people get their voice out there. You know, the author that may not have 100,000 followers on Twitter or TikTok, you know, that still has an amazing story that needs to be told. We're here to help that person get their story out there. You know, we have a very diverse staff of writers, editors, graphic designers. I mean, we have everything that you could need. We offer editing services, marketing services, formatting, and cover design services. So we're kind of a one-stop shop for anybody who needs it. But for our authors that we sign, we handle everything for them. You know, we make sure we get their final approval, but we take care of the formatting, we take care of the editing, we take care of the book cover design, because that's how it should be. You know, these vanity presses who are out there, you know, making you pay for editing and cover design and formatting services. I mean, at that point, you might as well publish your own book. But I do have another book coming out in August. It is the second book of my Sunflower Kisses series. So that is the one I mentioned earlier with the main character, who is a male. He has mental health issues that he deals with, and he's in a long distance relationship. So that adds even more strain to his anxiety and depression. So I'm excited for that book to come out, and I'm just really excited to see where this company goes and how many more people we can help along the way.
John, would you like to go next?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there was talk of Minotaurs earlier. Got one right up here in the corner there. This is Emma and the Minotaur. It's book 1 in the World of Light series. It's for ages 10 and up. Emma's 11 years old. The Minotaur is kind of the bad guy in this. So there's mythical creatures are coming back to the world, and she has to save the world basically from an invasion of mythical creatures. Currently, I'm working on book number 3, Emma and the Queen of Darkness. It'll come out sometime this year. I can't say when, but that's my current project.
Nice. My latest book is The Unraveling Lunar Forester. So this is a dark fantasy with mental health rep. It's a loose Little Red Riding Hood retelling, if you like your retellings, your fairy tales. My next book coming out is in September, and it's book 2 of the Mermaid Chronicles, Quest for Atlantis. So this is a urban fantasy going on high fantasy for the new adult generation. We've got mermaids and shark shapeshifters and ancient curses, and also deals with grief and alcoholism throughout the series. I am working on a couple of things with my agent. One is a young adult novel called Plastic, which is kind of, I like to think of it as Jaws meets the environment. That also deals with grief. And I'm starting to plan out a Dracula retelling young adult origin story. Haven't quite figured out what his issues yet, but I'm at the planning stages for that one. I also mentor, if you are a middle grade or young adult author, I mentor through WriteMentor, and I also offer developmental editing services and book formatting services. And I am everywhere on social media, as much as I don't want to be. I am. So you can come find me wherever. Yeah, it's always Marisa Noelle something. So I'm there.
Well, I have this new release this side called Getting Off. It is a queer new adult romance that centers around positive representations of therapy and healing after trauma. November, I have a book coming out called The Heartbreak Handshake, which is fake dating in a small town, and it's part of a multi-author series. So that just went up for pre-order. It comes out November 1st and has autism and ADHD rep in an asexual story, which is really fun to write. And I am J.R. Hart author everywhere on social media because I am also chronically online. So
so there are a lot of different things that I do. So there are a bunch of different places to find me and a couple of things coming up. One thing that's coming up that's really exciting is my short story, Should I Stay?, which talks a lot more directly about mental health than a lot of things that I've written, is coming out in the anthology Nothing Without Us 2 in September. So that's super exciting. That is an anthology that is all stories by and about disabled people, ranging from mental illness to physical illness. And there are a lot of really exciting authors in there that I am so happy to be sharing space with. I am also, God's willing, releasing my second book, my second full-length novel, Moonshadow's Champion, at the end of October this year. And I also run conferences for writers, free virtual conferences on Weeknight Writers. There is a Weeknight Writers Twitter account at WK Night Writers. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Dianna with 2 N's, L Gunn with 2 N's.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for being here again. And I'd like to thank anyone watching for watching.